I'm excited to have our next guest on. It's a senior consultant from our team. Her name is Amanda Patton. And before I introduce her or bring her onto the show, a fun little connection here with Valentine's Day, Parisa, is that, I don't know if you know this or not, but over my right shoulder right here is a record cover that is called Third Stage. It's from the band Boston, which I know is way before your time, but I'm sure your parents or maybe your grandparents probably listened to it, back in my day. That's the kind of stuff we were listening to. You guys are listening to like all the pop and the top 40 stuff now, but you kids today. But us older folks were us graybeards and old timers were listening to bands like Boston back in the day. And the reason I bring it up is I named our company after that album behind me. And the first song on the album is called Amanda, which is one of the greatest love songs, Valentine songs, whatever you want to call it, of the 80s. So it's a pretty interesting coincidence that our next guest on the show is Amanda Patton from the Third Stage team. So it's only fitting that we would have an Amanda on our team. So a little cool connection there between Amanda and Boston Third Stage.
Oh, I love that. I got to listen to that song. Maybe that'll be our theme song this Valentine's Day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great song. It was really popular when I was in 8th grade. And interestingly enough, I had a girlfriend. My first girlfriend was in 8th grade, and her name was Amanda. And that song came out. It just it only made sense that it all somehow ties back to Third Stage and this company. It's a stretch, but it works for me.
Meant to be.
Yeah, right.
It works.
Right. So Amanda's someone myself and others on the team have known for several years. Actually, she's been in the industry for a long time, even before she crossed over into the independent consulting space. She's worked at software vendors and done a lot of project management, and now done quite a bit of consulting, a lot of different projects for our team. And we're going to dive into a case study of a project that she's working on today. So without further ado, Amanda, welcome to the show.
Eric, thanks for having me.
Sure. So we before we get into this software evaluation and software selection case study, I just want to talk a little bit about your background and your career journey and the transition you've made recently from working with software vendors in the past and now becoming a consultant at Third Stage. And I know you joined the company last year. So how has that transition been? And I want to talk about it in the context, especially as we get into this discussion around software evaluation, but you have a pretty unique perspective having been on the vendor side. How has that transition gone, and what are some of your observations being a consultant, working for Third Stage, being independent and agnostic versus working for the software vendors?
Good question. It's definitely different. It's a much broader perspective on this side, I will say. Coming from the vendor perspective, we were looking at a specific set of functionality and what it is that we can do, and kind of looking at it through that lens. And it was rather limited, I suppose. And then when you come to this side, you really, my view is expanded because I'm not tied to any particular technology. I'm not really looking at it through the lens of the solution. I'm more looking at it from, what does the client need? What is the outcome we're trying to get to? And taking in a lot of different factors. A lot of the technologies can do a lot of the same things, but there are more important factors, kind of the bigger picture view. So I think that's the main difference is instead of knowing everything about one solution, you need to know a little bit about all the solutions, and most importantly, really get to the bottom of what the client's trying to achieve in the end.
Yeah, coming at it from a different perspective. And you probably have I would imagine you have a pretty unique understanding of how software vendors work and how they try to sell their software versus what the client may or may not need.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, good.
I think it's easy to see that. I have sympathy for what they're going through and the job they've been tasked with, but also, having the ability to kind of see through some of the sales tactics and really get down to the functionality and what the customer's after. So,
yeah, you're onto them. You understand the head games they're playing in the sales process.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, so I know since you've joined Third Stage, you've been involved with a number of different types of projects, including a number of software evaluations and selections. And so today we wanted to talk in particular about one that you're working on right now. You're sort of right in the thick of it. You just finished demos last week, from what I understand, and you're sort of haven't reached a decision yet, or we haven't made the final recommendation to this client yet. But I thought it'd be a good time to have the discussion of kind of what are you seeing and what are you experiencing. But before we dive into some of those details, maybe give us just a little bit of background. We can't reveal the name of the client for confidentiality reasons, but how would you describe the client at a high level as far as what they do, how many employees they have? Just give us some general context here.
Sure. So they are a relatively new company and growing quite rapidly, and have under 100 employees. And I would call them an e-commerce platform distribution company in terms of what it is that they do and bring to the market. And so with that being a relatively new company, I think their perspective is a little different than some of the other clients that I'm used to working with. So I, looking at their tremendous growth and looking at the ability to scale, but also stay unique and stay, in the core competencies and the things that make them unique in the marketplace. It's a tough balance as you start to get bigger. So, one of the things that they said early on was that they were growing up, and so part of that is that your technology has to also grow up with you. So that's the challenge.
Yeah. So, what is what is it that makes them unique in terms of their business model or the organization itself? How would you describe that?
I mean, they are very modern and open-minded and tech savvy and kind of have this do-it-yourself mentality and of wanting to, build and have creative latitude and have the autonomy to create technology that reflects their process, reflects their customer, reflects their market. And even COVID recently, as an example, having to pivot and having the ability to then turn around and make updates and customizations and alterations to their homegrown application that they use, right? Because they own it and they built it, and so that's a quick and easy thing to do. And that's not always the case, right? If you are on someone else's technology, I think too that they're very engaged and very creative, and so a lot of times companies, have done things a certain way for a really long time, or the technology, you just kind of expect this is what the technology is going to look like. We're going to have to sort of, you know, fit ourselves into that, and that's not really their perspective. They're very unique and very nuanced in what they bring to the market, the way they service their customers, and so there are a lot of challenges because it doesn't necessarily fit into the box or the process as we say, but also a lot of great opportunities to learn, to be creative, and to try new things.
Right. So, and I actually want to come back to some follow-up questions on that point about their unique culture and the unique operations and even some of the current systems that they have in place that are currently being strained as they grow. But we'll come back to that. But before I get to that, maybe just to back up a little bit, what is the scope or what is our role on this project working with this client?
Our role is to help them evaluate technology that would help their business to become more efficient and to scale with their growth. They had, 4x growth in 2018, just like I said, growing really, really fast. And to help them look at their process, right? So that's a separate thing of, workshops, really talking through what does your process look like now? What is it going to look like in the future? What changes could you be making to make those more efficient, streamline some of that from a process perspective? And then, how does that marry up to the technology you're currently using and the technology that you're, evaluating? So our job is to help them really just take a big picture view of everything, right? The process, the technology that's available, and also really listening to what it is that they want. Like I said, they aren't traditional. It's not like they've had the same system in place for 20 years and now they're looking to swap it out for a different system. This is a young, creative, tech savvy company who's built their own technology. And so they want to have autonomy to a point and the ability to continue to have some control over their technology, but they know that they need the structure of an ERP system, a single source of truth, if you will, in place if they are going to continue to keep up with their growth and market share.
Right. That's interesting. So, with this homegrown mentality and the ownership of the technology they have now, what have some of the challenges been in terms of either outgrowing the system or facing limitations? What are some of those challenges that we've observed in our assessment of them so far?
So I would say the amount of manual work, probably out of the gate, that's the main pain point is when you're small and you're just starting out, that's fine, but they've grown so quickly and to be able to keep up with that growth, they've had to really work harder and harder and harder to maintain it and to expand it and to make sure that it can keep up with, what they needed to keep up with. They're having a really hard time synthesizing all the data. There's push and pull and data coming in from all kinds of different tools, and having data isn't really that useful if it can't tell you the story that you need to know to make business decisions. And so that's certainly one of the big challenges. There are a lot of complexities around managing 3PL. We hear that a lot. And so just understanding the logistics and how you work with that, how you push and pull the data in a way that helps you to have, accurate information. And like I said, real-time data that you can make decisions off of, not having to spend 2 weeks pulling reports and running Excel and doing workarounds and all those kinds of things. So, and then customer happiness, right? The ability to look into a system and say, here's where your order is. This is why it's delayed. Having really good information because they're extremely customer centric and they want to make sure that they have real time information and that they're keeping their customers happy. And then, just continuing to the growth has been monumental, and they know they have.
Right. So, what is it that in the market, or if, and I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but what is driving their growth? What's fueling that 4x growth that they experienced last year? Is it's just lack of competition in their niche, or something they're doing differently that's fueling that growth?
I think it's a combination of factors. As some of the mortar and old ways of shopping and doing business have changed. People are more likely to go online and to get really good information. And if you're used to dealing with Amazon or the like, it's you can have something to your house the next day. You can have where it is, when it's going to be there. You competitive from a pricing perspective. So the way we shop as people as a nation, has changed a lot. And so that has fed into their success and their ability to pull together just tons of information and really curate a process and an experience really for the customer so that you don't have to spend so much time looking at 17 different websites or product reviews and all these different things. It's all pulled together to make the shopping experience better for the customer. And I think, to be able to do that and then to have all the reviews and all the information there in one place is just one of the reasons. And then, of course, with COVID, which has happened with a lot of companies, the online shopping is pretty much how we live now, for the most part, right? And so a lot of traffic who would have preferred to go to a brick and mortar to do some of this are going to be online. So that's another reason. And I will say some of the brick and mortar stores where some of their products would be, have gone away or they are going away. And they're being kind of absorbed into a different model. And so all of that has led to their ability to grow.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting to hear you describe this growth and the evolution and the fast evolution of this company. And on one hand, that requires a certain amount of flexibility and entrepreneurial spirit and adaptability. But then on the other hand, you also mentioned that they want to add structure and they want to use technology to help standardize or structure some of their business different. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to ask you some more questions around that and just what we're seeing in particular with the different types of technologies we're evaluating for them right now, and where some of the strengths and weaknesses are. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. And I'm here with Amanda Patton. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Amanda, welcome back. We're talking about, before the break, the software evaluation we're going through with this client and some of the unique challenges that they're trying to address as a result of their transformation. They've gone through quite a bit of growth, and they're an entrepreneurial company, very customer-centric, and at the same time, they're trying to introduce technology to provide some structure and an ability to scale. So with all that being said, and that sort of high-level current state assessment, where did we land in our shortlist? What sort of shortlist do we recommend to the client, and where are we at in the process?
So we just wrapped up demos last week, and I'll just kind of start by saying this was different, as I've alluded to earlier in the conversation. They are unique, and the reason for that is that they have grown a lot of technology, on their own, and a lot of that works for them. And then they're starting, as they've grown, starting to notice some limitations, and asking questions like, how sustainable is this? How long can we continue to do this? That kind of thing. It's becoming more of a heavy lift for the tech team. And so our shortlist had a mixture of what we would consider, more traditional core ERP, like Sage and NetSuite, and then a couple of open source options too. We wanted to look at Odoo and ERP Next and try to understand on the spectrum, um, you know, solutions that would offer structure and the single source of truth that you're going to get out of an ERP system with some autonomy and the option, if you want your tech team to continue to be able to kind of build some of that out and do some of those customizations. So before that we kind of landed on from a shortlist perspective, and we did want a mixture of different options. We could really delve into what that was going to look like for them.
Yeah, it almost seems like, hearing you talk, it almost seems like there's a decision to be made around, how much do we want to push or change the culture and the operations. With the open source options with Odoo and ERP Next, obviously that's going to be more aligned with a more flexible model, and X3 and especially NetSuite is going to be more structural and more, if you're moving more towards a standard model. Has that been a key discussion point, or has that been a consideration in the evaluation so far?
It is a huge discussion point, one that has been going on since the very beginning and continues to this day, and will, I'm sure. And a lot more clarity has been uncovered as we've continued workshops and discussions, and looked at the pros and cons on both sides. And we actually we've been calling it a strategic fork in the road, because regardless of what system you select and implement, there are some strategy decisions to be made within the company. And so those are some tough questions where, people have to look at the strategy, the culture, the future, the growth, and all of the different things. And in some cases, it may be worth making a change to process. And other times, some of the pain points could be addressed by one of these systems. Some of the pain points are not going to be by any technology, right? It's a people situation, it's a process situation. So really taking the time to have conversations and workshops and make sure we're engaging everyone across different functional areas, across different, roles and levels of the organization, just to make sure that there's a lens for every part of the business, that we're not just looking at it, from a technical standpoint or a people standpoint or a process standpoint. And
Right.
that really is one of the biggest challenges, is the the strategic fork in the road. There are some big decisions to be made. The client has made quite a few that have helped kind of narrow the path and help us understand what it is they're really trying to get to. But there's still some work to be done in that regard.
Interesting. So there's two different directions. Speaking of fork in the road, there's two different paths I could take. The next question, but I'll start with maybe the technology itself and come back to the organizational piece of it. But on the pure technology side, given the short list that you guys have, the fact that you just had demos last week, what are some of the general observations you have as it relates to this client and how those different systems compare to one another?
So the demos ended up being X3 and NetSuite. And, Odoo did really well in the RFP analysis, but didn't make it to demo because we were kind of having conversations about the structure that needs to be in place and not having so much onus on the product engineering team as they move forward and continue to grow and the need to grow. Because what that means is you're going to have to keep hiring and adding to that infrastructure to be able to support that. And as we took a closer look, while Odoo is an incredible solution and we found a lot of really great, valuable things about it, some of the internal discussions within the client sort of kind of pulled us in a different direction. So because of those discussions and workshops and such, we ended up with X3 and NetSuite. And getting to see the demonstrations from each of them really gave the client kind of more options, right? Trying to understand, if there's a scale or a spectrum, there was, ERP next and Odoo, and then X3, and then we kind of get over to NetSuite in terms of the I don't think rigidity is the right word, but it's a structure, right? It's there, and this is kind of what it is, and great demonstration, great functionality. We know plenty of clients who use NetSuite, but in the case of this client, the ability to take those applications and customize them. So it's saying two things of, yes, we have a single source of truth. We all the functionality you would expect out of the box from an ERP system, but we also have the flexibility to make changes, optimization as we go. And so if we need to pivot quickly due to the market, the customer, just whatever's going on, they are able to do that internally without going back to code and having to go through bringing in additional consultants or some of those kinds of things. So I think the ability to be more, we saw a little bit more of that with X3. And then, of course, there are conversations about, all the integrations and what does that look like? And how does each vendor, work with those kinds of things? And at the end of the day, what is it going to look like in the day of the life of the people who work for this company? Walk me through this scenario. And that's what a lot of the demonstrations were, a lot of very unique and nuanced scenarios that had to be addressed. And so, in my estimation, X3 had a little more flexibility from that perspective.
Right.
But both did great. Both did great demonstrations and have great.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like when, you did a good job describing that spectrum or the continuum that, Odoo and ERP Next have over on the flexible open source side, and then NetSuite's kind of the other extreme with the more standard, mature processes and that sort of thing. And, the interesting thing about that is no matter which direction they go, and it sounds like, they may end up somewhere in the middle, but if you go to either extreme there's going to be some sort of trade-off. Either you're going to own, the onus is going to be on your IT department to own and maintain the technology more than you might with the NetSuite, or if you go with the NetSuite, that's going to put more of an organizational impact or put more pressure on organizational change management with those standardized processes, especially given their entrepreneurial nature.
Yes, definitely. And I think that the trade-off is the losing some autonomy for some more of the structure, so that we've got these repeatable processes and this single source of truth and this, data that's going to start to really tell a story over time and that. So, and that was another, part of the internal conversations that needed to happen of, with control over the technology. It's also work for your team. And how much work do you want to have and for how long, and is it scalable with the growth that you're experiencing? At some point, that economy, that's not gonna probably make a whole lot of sense in the long run. So, yeah.
Right. So I think you've touched on this a little bit, but maybe dig in, if we can dig in a little bit more. When you think about change management and how this project and this overall implementation or transformation will affect this client, and I know we don't know the technology yet. We don't know, we haven't made a formal recommendation yet. They haven't made a decision. But in general, what would you anticipate the change management challenges being? Some of the biggest change management issues or challenges that this particular client will need to face?
I, I will say that this client has been uh, really engaged, really excited, a lot of input. And so that is really good from an OCM perspective. That's a really good place to be where you've got a lot of, engagement. So they started off on a really strong, um, uh, from that perspective, really strong. But I would say too that because this is a newer company and you have a lot of people who the demographic of this company is used to very, new, modern technology, as opposed to um, some of us who, maybe are used to more traditional technologies. And
Right.
so I think that's a part of it too, is if the employees of a client have been through ERP, implementations before, or they're accustomed to those types of technologies, this isn't a new language. But if you're coming from a world where you haven't worked with that, or you haven't been through a selection and implementation before, a lot of the terminology and the process and a lot of it would seem foreign. And it may be even a little corporate, or restraining, or that kind of thing. So that to me will be one of the biggest challenges, is to understand that this is a tool to help stabilize and kind of mature their process as a company too. And they said it themselves, they're growing up, right? And so part of that is kind of making sure that you have the technology in place to support what you're doing now and what you're going to be doing in the future. And I would say too, training, just making sure that's being communicated and that people are being offered training, and the rationale behind the training too, right? This is a very creative, technically savvy, curious group of people, and they want to understand the why and what's the impact, and all of those types of things. So explaining the big picture instead of, just do this because, like you find in some corporate environments, more of a conversation, pulling people in and getting buy-in and keeping them excited about. At the end of the day, this is going to make your life easier. It may not seem like it now, but that is the goal. It's also going to position the company for, long-term success in the market. But I think getting over you know, it's the technology they use now is fun and exciting, and it's like all the shiny things, in the tech world, versus kind of getting into something that's a little more mature, a little more, predictable. And so I think that will be the big bridge.
Yeah. And you're kind of underscoring a really important point about software evaluation in general for organizations, is that there's no one size fits all answer. And this client has such a unique culture, a unique business model, so much different than other clients of ours, for example, that are manufacturing companies that have been around for 100 years and they have pretty well established processes. It's just, two very different worlds and two very different evaluations and outcomes you're going to get, which I find really interesting.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's been interesting.
So to summarize then, if I'm a organization that's thinking about a digital transformation or thinking about new technology or software for my business, what are some of the biggest points of or the biggest recommendations, the most important recommendations you might make to me as a company that's about to start this sort of journey?
Well, I think one of the things is to start with the foundation, to really, and I think a lot of times this process gets overwhelming and complicated really quickly. You start doing research and you're watching videos and you're comparing things, and it gets a little overwhelming. and people get out ahead of themselves, I think, sometimes. And so for me, it's to start with the foundation of like, what defines success? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And getting on the same page about that. And also asking, is what we're doing now sustainable? Is what we're doing working? Are we being reactive or proactive to the market and the changes? And I think a lot of companies have had this demonstrated for them, or, some good, some bad on how they pivoted and how they were able to react, and what this kind of like with COVID, how, what that brought in and what it exposed. And in the long run, it'll probably be a really good thing, even though a little bit painful sometimes. I think also making sure that you're kind of demystifying, decomplicating the process, right? And just getting down to facts of, what it is that we're trying to achieve. And then taking things, my final advice would just be to phase, take things in small bites, you know, and and we talk about this all the time at third stage, but really looking at the process in the current state and making sure that you have a really good, healthy understanding of what that is, and knowing that no technology is going to come in and magically fix things, that it'll be a joint effort from the technology side, process, and the people. And I do have one more thing that kind of pops up, is that the subject matter experts need access to the process, right? The buy-in, the opinions, the day in the life, and really understanding what it looks like. Because if you're an executive, you may just see, the reports, and you may see a sliver of it. But when you talk to some of the subject matter experts and the functional area owners, the inefficiencies that are happening in the company, due to kind of the process and the technology challenges, would make an executive's head spin if they really knew some of the inefficiencies, and the time suck and the frustration, and maybe some of the inaccuracies and things like that. So that was kind of a long list, but those are the things that kind of stand out to me.
Yeah, you cover the whole spectrum there, from strategy down to the subject matter experts and kind of what's happening on the front lines there. And I think that's a good reminder for executives that might be listening, that this isn't just a real simple technology replacement. This is messing with people's lives, with their jobs, with the way you do business, the way you interact with your customers. All that stuff's going to be impacted. So, well, good. Well, I appreciate you being on the show here, Amanda. I really appreciate the time you spent here today.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. So we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.